Hey guys, welcome. I hope you all are doing well. So in this video, we're going to discuss about one of the most notorious error that we faced while Angular development. What is this error and what I'm talking about? So just go straight into the browser and take a look. So there it is. The error is expression changed after it has been checked. I'm pretty sure, I think any of you, whoever is in Angular development, sometime during your development you face this error. I'm pretty sure about it. And for new Angular developers, it is very hard to find out what is the reason behind this, why this is happening, how could I overcome to this. So don't worry about everything. In this video we're going to discuss about everything. Why this is happening, what is the reason, how we overcome to this. So everything from the very beginning. So don't worry. So before we start, I just want to give you a brief introduction of this error, I would say. So this error basically deals with the Angular change detection mechanism. Now what is Angular change detection mechanism? Don't worry, I'm not going to go deep dive into Angular change detection, how this works. No, not at all. But I'm going to give you a very high level overview how Angular change detection is related with this particular error. Okay, so to discuss this, let's go into one of the mock-ups that I have prepared especially for this. So I'm pretty sure you all are very familiar with the Angular lifecycle hooks. So for each component there are 8 lifecycle hooks. They are on init, do check, on changes, after content init, and right so. So come to this picture, come to this mock-up. Okay, so in this mock-up, as you can see, we are having 2 components. The first is app component and the second is component A. So component A is a child component. Now what is happening in this mockup? Why I'm explaining all this to you? So just hold on for a second and I'm pretty sure this will make a lot of sense to you. So just give me a second. Okay, so what happens when your Angular application loads for the first time? And please make sure in this application we are having only 2 components, nothing fancy about it. One root component, which is our app component, and the second is a child component, which is component A. So when my application loads, the first thing that will execute is my root component. I think it's very pretty clear to everyone. So what is happening? The first time when my application loads, these 4 lifecycle hooks of app component will trigger. Now these hooks are on init, do check, after content init, after content checked. It's a very straightforward thing. These 4 hooks, first when my application loads. Nothing is going on in the child component so far. Okay, now come to this 5th section. Now what is this? Now it says update inbound properties in the view. Now what are inbound properties and what is view? So view is nothing but the HTML file of my app component. And what are input properties? Input properties, as we all know, they are properties which are used to pass data from parent to child. And how we declare them? So we use input decorator to describe those input properties. Okay, so coming back to this 5th step, which is again update input bound properties in the view. So what is happening actually at this step, the Angular will go to the HTML file of our root component and it will update all the input bound properties. Now those properties could be for any other child component, as well as they could be for one of the element that may be an HTML element that could be used inside the parent component. For example, if you are having any HTML element inside the HTML file and you are using any kind of input binding like style or for any class, so all those properties will be updated when this fifth step will be run. So I think what happens so far, first all these 4 hooks will be triggered, and in the fifth step Angular update all the input bound properties. Now Angular will also store their value somewhere, and if you are having any child component, so what will happen exactly, the input bound properties will trigger this ng on changes of the child component A. So let's imagine that in our app component HTML file we are having component A, and component A is having some input bound property. So when Angular comes to this fifth step, it updates that property and the ng on changes hook inside component A will be triggered. Okay, and then the step will go on. Then the second thing is it will trigger ng on init, ng do check, and ng after content init, and ng after content checked. So this is the third step. So first concentrate on these highlighted figures so far. Don't take all other things at a time. So far what is happening, my application loads, my root component hooks will be triggered, and then all input bound properties will be updated, and this updation will trigger on changes for the component A, on init, do check, content init, and after content checked. So don't go any further, just stop till here. So now we will gonna show this in the code itself, that how this thing works. And make sure that Angular already recorded the updated value of the input bound property. So far we are done. Now let's go into the code and find out. Okay, so let's come into the coding section. So this is an Angular 6 CLI generated project, and it has 2 components. As we already discussed, one is my root component, which is this app component, and the second is component A. Okay, so let's take a look into the root component, what we are having here. So my root component is having 2 properties, title, first name, and I'm having 4 lifecycle hooks, on init, do check, content init, and content checked. And I have used console log, to better explain and to show you in the browser that they will be triggered. And come to the HTML section. Okay, so in my HTML, what I have done, we are simply having an h1 with the title property and component A with the input bound property first name, and this first name is bound to the first name property of my root component. So don't get confused by the first name. We are having first name as input bound property in the component A, as well as first name property inside my root component as well. So we are binding this first name property with components A input bound property. Look here, first name property. Fine. Now inside my component A, I have done the same. I have used all other lifecycle hooks like on changes, on init, do check, content init, content checked, and using the same logic as inside the component in the root component, sorry. So let's go and run this application. Okay, so here it is. Nothing special. This is just one h1 heading, and this thing is coming from my component A. Now please notice that this Peter, that this property Peter is defined. Okay, come to here. So this is my first name property, which I have bounded from my root component, and I'm showing it inside my component A as my name is first name. And here my name is Peter, first name is Peter, so it is reflecting here. Now what I want to show you, come to the inspect element. Okay, come to the console. Now take a look into this. Now what we are having here, we are having component app. Component app means root component. So take a look into the sequence of these console logs. So first is app on init, app do check, app after content init, app after content checked. So the sequence is same that we have discussed in the mockup here. So this sequence is very much same. First, these 4 lifecycle hooks, which we can see here as well, and then inside my child component. Now look what is happening. Component A changes, component A on init, component A do check, component A after content init, and component A after content checked. So it is the same sequence that we have mentioned here. First these 4 hooks and then these 5 hooks. Okay. Okay, now one very interesting thing. Okay, look at these 4 things. Component app do check, after content checked, do check, and after content checked. So why these things are coming again? As you can see, these hooks are already triggered first time here. Then why these hooks are triggered again? Now this is something related with change detection, Angular change detection. So Angular change detection basically consists of 2 loops. So imagine that we are having a cycle which we call content change detection cycle, and each cycle has 2 loops. So in the first loop, all properties will be set. Angular record all its properties. So what I mean by first loop is all these components, sorry, all these hooks, they all are triggered when the first loop of the change detection runs. So imagine in this application my first loop runs, it sets all my properties, and Angular stores all these values somewhere. And second time when the loop runs, which is the part of change detection cycle, as I said, we are having 2 loops. So in the second loop, Angular runs through all these things again and matches the value. What Angular does, Angular checks that the value which is stored in the first loop, is it gonna same in the second loop or not? If it's not, then there will be some error. And if it's exactly the same what it was in the first loop, no problem, Angular will go ahead. So all these 4 hooks, they will be triggered while the second loop is running. Okay, now you ask why only these 4 hooks? Because all hooks which are on init, such as app on init, content init, view init, we will come to the view init later on, all these hooks will never be triggered. They will be triggered only once when the application loads. I think we all know this. So all these 4 hooks, they will be triggered during the second loop of our change detection cycle. Okay, so from here we can conclude that the change detection cycle of Angular consists of 2 loops. The first loop, it will store all the values, and the second loop, it will check all the values. Fine. Okay, now comes the interesting part. Okay, now I'm gonna do something. Please take a note of this, and this will really excite us. So what I'm gonna do, I'm having my first name property as Peter in my root component. Now I'm going to my app component. Okay, now all child components have a default nature that they could they could inject their parent component. So what I'm doing here, I'm injecting my parent component inside my inside my child component, and the root component is app component. Now what I'm gonna do, I'm gonna go to any of these hooks, and what I'm gonna do this dot parent dot first name equals to John. Okay, so what I have done, I have injected my parent component inside my child component, and under ng-on-init hook I change this property name. I changed the value. It was Peter before, and now I change it to John. Now take a look into the app. Oh, there it is. So can you see the error? And let's see what the error says. The error says expression changed after it has been checked, and expression has changed after it was checked. Previous value first name Peter, current value first name John. Okay, so we find out the error. We haven't gone through why it is coming and how we could resolve, but here we can find out that yes, the error is coming. That's good. That's good for us. Now go into the code. Okay, so what actually I have done? I have done nothing, very special here. Inside my child component, inside one of the hooks of my child component, I changed the property of my parent component. Okay, now can you remember the life cycle hooks or the change detection cycle that we had discussed? Here. Okay, so let's take a look into this. So what I'm doing, I'm changing the property of my parent component inside my ng-on-init. Now remember, in the first loop of the change detection cycle, Angular already stores this first name property as Peter. And when the second loop runs, it checks that is the new value is going to match my old value or not, and they are not matching because my new property is John here. So Angular is confused. Angular says that you set your property, your first name property as Peter, and now you are changing it John while the cycle is not completed. So this is why this error is coming. So please concentrate what I'm saying. We have already set this property in one of the life cycle hooks, and before the second loop will be completed, I have changed this property. I changed this property first name to John, and Angular doesn't understand this. He throws this error. So what actually we have done? We have changed the property. We have changed the property before the second loop will be completed. Okay. Now the same thing. Now if you go into the mockup, if I do the same thing inside any of these life cycle hooks, the problem will be as it is. It will not be gonna solve. I'm gonna show you. If I copy this, if I'm gonna put this inside here, Control S, if we go back to our application, look, the error is as it is. Sorry, we are still facing the error. So this means that if we set this property, which has already been set in the first loop in any of these Angular hooks, the Angular is not going to accept it, and Angular is going to throw this error. Okay, and please be note that this is the input bound property of my parent component. Okay, now come back to this mockup again. So far what we have done, so far we have covered all the steps till ng after content checked of my child component. Now take a look into this arrow. What it is saying? It is saying updates view. Okay, updates view. So my child component has already triggered his 5 life cycle hooks, and now we are coming back to the updates view of my parent component. So this updates view is in my parent component. Now what is updates view? So now actually the view is HTML file, so we are coming back into the HTML file, and if you remember, we only set the input bound properties. We have not we have not encountered any other thing inside HTML file other than input bound properties. So now Angular will come back and Angular will update all other properties which are not input bound properties. Suppose we are using some of the property as a template expression, so now Angular will update these properties. Angular have not updated these properties before. So in this step, which is update input bound properties, Angular only updated input bound properties and stores them. But what about the other properties? Those properties are updated when Angular comes to this step. Okay, now let's go and see this inside the code. Okay, now in my root component, see, I have 2 properties, first name and title. So my first name property is bounded to the input property here. Okay, but what about the title property? So when Angular updates the input bound properties, it has not set this title property. It means the initial value of title property is not being set yet. So in this updates view, in this step, Angular will go and update these properties, which are different than input bound properties. So here Angular will come in the first loop of the change detection cycle, and it will set this title to welcome to Angular world. Now come to the component A, which is the child component. Okay, now here I'm doing something. I'm doing this, sorry, the first name dot this dot parent dot title, and I'm saying welcome to React world. Okay, and I'm commenting down this section. Now take a look. See, there is no error. Okay, don't look into this HTTP response thing in nothing. I'm just refreshing this again, and see, welcome to React world. Our values changed. Now how is this possible? I mean, you guys will say that I told you that you cannot change the properties, inside child components lifecycle hooks, and in the mockup as well, we already discussed that we cannot change these properties here. But wait, there is a difference. I told you that the properties which are other than input bound properties are not set. Those properties are set in this step, which is updates view. This means that in the first loop, Angular will update this property first time when it comes to this step. This means in the second loop, when the Angular will check there is no discrepancy, because Angular will say in my first loop you already set this property as welcome to React world, and in the second loop there is no other changes. Are you getting my point? But the case is completely different when we discuss this thing with an input bound property, because input bound property in the mockup is set at this step, and then we are running these steps. So you cannot change this value in these steps, in these lifecycle hooks. Whereas the property which is different than input bound property, that property is initialized for the first time under this section. So you can change its value. This is not gonna affect, this is not gonna change the value when the second loop will run. So you can easily change these values. So here you find the difference. The difference is very clear. Input bound properties cannot be changed inside the lifecycle hooks of its child component, but other properties could be changed. But there is an exception to this. Now we'll come to this exception. Okay, so now what is this exception? How is this possible that we could change the properties which are other than input bound properties? So come to this mockup again. So far we have discussed till this step, updates view. So in the child component, after ng after content checked, it came back to the parent component, updates the view, updates the DOM, the HTML file. And then what happens? See this. It again goes to the child component, and now it updates the input bound properties in the view of the child component. Can you imagine? Can you imagine how this is going through? So we have done the same thing in the parent component. Now we are doing the same thing in the child component. So it will update the input bound properties of the child component A. And then what happens? Look at this. Is there any child component? If it is, then it will go and repeat the same process. The same process that will start from here. This process. So if you are having any other child component, it will go and implement the same thing here. And this will go on till you reach the very last child, or till the very last node in the tree, in the component tree. But in our case, we are not using any other child component, so it comes to here. It updates the input bound properties if there are any, and then it comes back to the view of the child component, and it updates the view. It updates the other properties other than input bound properties in the HTML file of component A. And then what? Then the other two hooks, after view init and after view checked. And after these hooks, it will come back to the parent component and it will run the same hooks inside the parent component. Okay, so this is the entire cycle. This is the entire change detection cycle for a parent and for a child. So far what we have done, we have updated the input bound properties, we have updated the other properties, and we have find out why we are not able to change the input bound properties in these hooks, because the property is already set. Okay, now some other steps related to this. So one thing is very clear, we cannot change an input bound property which is linked to a parent component inside my child component, because Angular has already set up those properties and now it will not accept if you change this property. And we will show this inside ng after view init and ng after view checked as well. So go straight into the code now. Okay, so if I introduced two other hooks, that is after view init and after view checked, and if I do the same thing here, ng after view init and ng after view checked. Okay, and I'm doing this thing. Okay, that's fine. Now what I'm gonna do, the property, the parent property that we have changed, the title property, I would change it here in the view initialized. This dot parent dot title, and I would say again, welcome to React World. Now let's see what will happen. Oh, I forgot to do one thing. I need to comment this out. And now let's see what's gonna happen. Can you see this? This error came again, and we are changing the title property of my parent component, of my root component. But why now? When we used to change this property inside ng on init, there was no error. But why, when I used to do the same thing inside view init, why this is? Now come to the mockup again. Okay, now take a look into this mockup again. I'm changing the value of my property of my root component inside this hook ng after view init. But this hook will be triggered after updates view. So I have already updated my value in the updates view. And now I'm changing this inside after view init, and Angular will again say that you already set the value, now why you are changing, and there is a mismatch, so Angular will throw the error. So what is the conclusion? The conclusion is this: before Angular sets it for the first time, you have an open window to change the property, so that we could change the property inside these 5 hooks. But once Angular updates this property, you cannot change it inside one change detection cycle. Angular will not accept it. And the same is happening with the input bound properties. If the property is changed once it is set, Angular will not accept, and Angular will start throwing these errors. Fine? So this is why the browser is throwing this error, because we are changing it once Angular has set that. Okay? And if we do the same thing inside my component, my parent component, so there is no dependency inside it, but if I do this dot title is equals to I want to save this again and see, there is no error here. Why? So there is no error. Why? The answer lies here. we change the property inside content init. And if you look into the mockup, this content init is triggered way before this step. So we could do this. But we are not allowed to change once this step has been initialized, has been triggered. You have no rights to do that. But we can do it inside this section. Okay? I think this makes sense to you. Okay, now if I do the same thing inside my parent component, okay, and just bear with me for a few more minutes. And we are not having parent here. Okay. Now let's see. Okay, the error is back. Why it is? Because now we are setting the property here, where the property, the initial value is already initialized at this step. So we are not allowed to make any change inside here. Does this make sense? I think so. So friends, we have completely, we have gone through everything in the change detection, in the lifecycle hooks, and we figure out why this is happening, why we are getting this error. So what happens actually, as we already discussed a lot of time, that the change detection cycle consists of two loops. The first loop is responsible for setting the values, and the second loop is responsible for matching those values. If there is any change, once you initialize your value once and you want to change it before the cycle completes, Angular is not going to accept it and it will throw the error. So this means if we are having any input bound property of parent, we cannot set that property inside child component. Okay, and the same is with the other property, a non-input bound property. You cannot set that property once it is initialized, and we already see this in the demo. So take a look into this mockup. I think this will explain you all the steps that we need. So friends, this is a very long video, I know, but I think it is good enough to give you a hint. So whenever you encounter this kind of error, what you need to do, you need to find out that are you doing some kind of initialization again, by following these steps. Are you initializing a value inside a change detection cycle twice inside one of these hooks? Where please don't do it. And if you like this video, please subscribe. And if you have any questions, then please put a comment. Thank you.